This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest is joining me on this podcast, episode 186, from the Metro Pittsburgh area, Matt Katase from Brew Gentlemen. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
Super excited to talk. Over the years, we've tasted and reviewed a whole bunch of your beers, and by my count, that's 10 beers that our blind panel has reviewed that have scored 92 or higher, and 6 of those are 96 or higher. A lot of high quality beers coming out of your operation out there in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Excited to talk about this whole range of things. And I think that's one of the cool things that you guys do. Brew excellent beers on everything from mixed culture saison, of course, to stout and barrel aged stout, and then IPA, being that kind of classic mid-Atlantic, northeastern, kind of soft, hazy IPA approach, but with a real character that defines all those beers. We're going to dive into all of those styles throughout this conversation. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with all aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. This episode is also brought to you by Raw North Star Pils, a new base malt to set your compass by. Raw North Star Pils is crafted for brewers looking for a domestic Pilsner malt with low color and low modification. North Star Pils carries overtones of honey and sweetbreads, supported by flavors and aromas of hay and a nutty character. It's suitable for any beer style, but particularly craft brewed versions of classic lagers. Let Raw North Star Pils guide your craft by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. So Matt, let's talk about Brew Gentlemen.
Let's do it.
Give me the history in a nutshell. How you guys got started. What was that entree to craft beer, and then what sparked you to start a brewery?
Yeah, so it's always funny, kind of reflecting, because the story of Brew Gentlemen started kind of in our college days. Asa Foster and I both were freshmen in college back in 2008. We lived on each other's floor freshman year. We ended up joining the same fraternity, became pretty close friends. My junior year of college, I decided to visit him for Thanksgiving. And he's from Boston, and I'm originally from Kona, Hawaii, so the Big Island. Thanksgiving break would be hard to go home for that. But sure. We actually happened to be reading a book on the beer industry. It was Brewing Up a Business. And we were kind of sitting there drunk on Thanksgiving dinner and, we're 20 years old. And I was like, hey, do you want to start a brewery? And he was like, sure, let's do it. I mean, originally I was
not even of legal drinking age quite yet. And here you were working on your business plan to open a brewery.
It's funny. So my background is operations research. I was a math major, and Asa was in the art program. And neither one of us were really thrilled with kind of what to do after college. Like, we saw a lot of our friends going to the job fairs and all of this, and neither one of us saw that as, where we wanted to play ball. My dad was also an entrepreneur. He owns a seaweed farm out in the Big Island. So I grew up, on an aquaculture farm. It's funny because brewing is like agricultural manufacturing. So it's like the progression. Asa being from, the art world and all of that, he was ready to just dive into something creative. And it was cool because, as we started to develop everything, we saw just how many different ways you could play and how many different hats you could wear running a business like a brewery. The next day after that, we actually used our fake IDs to go on a tour of Boston beer. I've told Jim this story too, and he laughed. He was just like, what state was your fake ID from? I hope that doesn't get him in trouble. But we were so determined. And I think that spring break, I went out to San Diego, and again, I won't even list all the breweries whose fake IDs but I mean, this was how badly we wanted it, and looked at getting internships, and spent my senior year really focusing on kind of writing the business plan, going out to the market, talking to folks. We kind of did the reverse of what I think a lot of breweries do, which is they are super into home brewing and they say, let's go pro. We kind of were so passionate about beer and the beer industry, and we're so fascinated by it, and said, okay, now it's time to learn how to brew. Which, is a little bit different, but it was, exciting in its own way. So we ended up graduating barely. We almost got kicked out of school for, they called illegal distribution of alcohol to minors. So, whatever, just trying to pin us for anything. Cause we were brewing in our fraternity garage.
Product testing. I mean,
exactly.
You have to do what you have to do. If that entrepreneurship is wrong, I don't want to be right.
Exactly. So we kind of slid under the door, Indiana Jones style, to graduation, and found our home in Braddock, which is about 15 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh. It's this richly historic steel town. It's where Andrew Carnegie kind of built his, steel empire. The Edgar Thomson Works is still running to this day. I see it every day on my drive in. Our brewery's kind of in the shadow of this large behemoth of a facility down the road. It's also home to the first Carnegie Library. So, a lot of his efforts were philanthropic in his older age. And so Braddock's got this, incredibly rich history. And it was a town that fell on incredibly hard times when the steel industry collapsed. It was kind of it was left to its own without a lot of support. And, there was a mayor at the time who's now Lieutenant Governor, John Fetterman, who is actually, I think he's also running for U.S. Senate now. So he's kind of been on his own career trajectory, but he was really kind of advocating for this reinvestment in this community that, he so strongly believed in. And we saw it as, the same as, like, we wanted to participate in helping, rebuild a community and be part of something that,
sure.
Should, this is the story of a lot of small towns everywhere in America right now. And it's so cool that there was so much, one, rich history and an incredible beauty here, and just an incredible community of people who have supported us along the way.
And breweries are great anchors, which is why a lot of those kinds of urban renewal, urban revitalization groups look to breweries to kind of become that anchor. They become something that people can visit, and they can make repeat visits to, and build this kind of critical mass of traffic, which can help attract other businesses to that area. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic piece of that whole story. When it works well like that. But let's talk about that that creative process for you all as you dove in to figure out what kind of beers you're going to make and what the brewery is going to be about, because you want to start a brewery, but there's lots of different kinds of beer that you can make. What talk to me about that kind of creative process of honing in what those beers are going to be and what they're going to taste like.
Yeah, it's funny looking back now, because two of the beers from our original business plan we still make. I mean, they've evolved, but the idea and concepts behind them are still there. Our flagship General Braddock's, which is kind of our, we don't call it a hazy IPA. We don't call it a New England IPA, but we call it an American IPA, but it is kind of that soft, balanced, hop forward flavor, not overly bitter beer. And then we also have kind of another beer that we do from time to time called White Sky, which was, those were the two beers that we were brewing in the fraternity garage. And that was a chai wheat beer. And honestly, what it became a base, that wheat beer base, that became something that we did other additions to. And some of our most beloved beers are actually a kind of a branch of that original brand. So I think as we got into it though, and as we had people in the tap room, we really started to refine and focus of, what stood out to us. And for us, it was balance. there were a lot of, I mean, we opened in 2014.
Oh, that elusive word balance that means
Yeah.
different things to whoever you talk to
Yeah,
about it.
it's so true. And it's funny, balance is created, not found. You really have to be intentional about balance. And I think we opened in May of 2014. We wrote a blog post that year called An Ode to Haze, and we got criticized for it. I mean, people were blasting us. I had a brewer from a brewery that now is no longer in existence tell me, you have a problem with your beer, there's something wrong, and all of this stuff. So, but the feedback from the customer was like they really appreciated the mouthfeel and the softness of our beers, and so we extrapolated that and said, okay, let's focus on General Braddock's and make that kind of our North Star and apply that same logic to all of the other beers in our portfolio to develop, like I think you were saying earlier, that's that kind of that creative style.
Yeah.
You're drinking a Brew Gentlemen beer.
Sure. And that is, I think, the thing that I really enjoy about there is a through line between your beers within similar styles. Your IPAs, you can tell that there's, kind of tweaks and difference here, but that there's a core kind of similarity. How do you all define that? Is that an ingredient based through line? Is that is there some process piece to that? Is that yeast driven? Is that malt driven? Are there just core hops that kind of, provide that central thing? How do you articulate that? Or is it simply a description that you all have, built out of written language to say, hey, this is kind of, the core of what this is?
I think a little column A, a little column B. I mean, a little bit of everything. I think one of the things that we did as a young company was really dove into, mission, values, all those things. A lot of books will tell you, as a company,
right,
these are the things you need to build out. And one of the things that we talked about, though, was kind of balance being, we keep things simple. We don't try to overcomplicate things in a lot of ways. Simplicity is difficult to achieve. It's a lot of work to reach that. We are patient. We've been playing a long game. I was just telling someone recently, we're about to celebrate our 7th anniversary, 10 years since writing the business plan, 11 years almost. And the brewery's finally starting to look like that original vision. So patience and playing the long game and that mindset and that intention going into a lot of our beers. I mean, I think if you have that as kind of like the overarching theme and the tone and the voice of, even just the way we interact as a team, it shows in our work. And, I think from a brewing perspective, it really is keeping it simple. I have talked with people that are like, I do this. And I'm like, I can't even keep up with you with, what you're throwing out, because it's just, when you're coming out with a new beer every week and doing all these things, it's hard to even get in reps on a single beer that you're iterating on to know what any of those tweaks, how you're making, any changes to them. That was actually one of the things I talked about with Tom, our head brewer, was especially with a core beer, which we've created with General Braddock's, is the reps are really how you learn your shit, because you are striving for consistency. You're striving for this product that is something that people are familiar with. So when you do these little tweaks, you actually notice it a lot more than, oh, I just did this with this one and it's gone. And then you do another one and it's gone. But it's, what are you measuring it against? So,
well, let's talk a little bit more about how you do that. Because I am interested, like, what that looks like, what the base of that beer looks like, what that range is, and then how you all articulate that, what that process looks like for, continuing to kind of tweak and to, help idealize that thing that you can taste in your mind, if it comes that direction, or it doesn't come ever. But before we do that, the world of craft beer is a different place now. Margins are more important than ever, so why not lower your ingredient cost? Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. Old Orchard produces high volumes of their retail juice brand, so economies of scale keep prices low for their bulk supply program. A little concentrate goes a long way, and you won't lose some of it through filtering like you would with purees. To start increasing your margins now, head on over to www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, Brewery DB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information. In 2019, over 1 million brewery visits were made by craft fans searching for breweries on brewerydb.com. In just a few weeks, Brewery DB will unveil an all-new experience to help craft lovers get back on the brewery trail. To take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB and increase your taproom traffic, set up your account on marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. So Matt, talk to me about this. One of the things I've been impressed by is that you all clearly have a palate. You clearly know what you want your beers to taste like. And then you also are working on that that technical end to help to figure out how to make the beers taste like that. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of creative process, and then how and some of the decisions that you've landed on with that kind of a through line in your IPAs.
Yeah, I think where it started really was just this, like you said, everyone's got a different definition of what balance is. For us, even with the beer that we were creating, where we started was, how do we build a bridge between the old school and the new school, right? We were seeing a lot of evolution of, the New England style IPA as we were, early on, getting started. And we didn't want to go too far in that direction. Like, everyone was trying to get more fruity, more juicy, more hazy, more this. And we were like, okay, where's the balance in here? Where's the where's the restraint? And I think restraint is also a critical word in all of this. But I think we started with words first. Honestly, it was what do we want our brewing portfolio to look like, and sticking with soft, balanced, and with soft, it's mouthfeel, right? It's totally just, texture is a characteristic of beer that I think is often overlooked, and easily for us, building it up from water. Starting with the correct water profile that, luckily we have really great water in Braddock, and, just messing around with chloride to sulfate ratios. I would say there's no secret there. Everything's online. Just, it's just playing with
Sure.
what you like and what works. Doing that instead of just thinking adding more hops is going to fix things. Even with malt, we keep a pretty simple grain bill for a lot of our beers. Base malt, some oats, but I hear people doing like crazy amounts, and I'm like, it's 20%, 25%, nothing too crazy. It's just one of those things that it's like almost like cooking, like Italian cooking, like or French. Anything, very simple ingredients. It's like pasta, salted water, good cheese, pepper. That's all you need. It's like, it's
And
very,
love is that key ingredient.
Yeah, exactly. And love. Yeah. Intention. But love, intention. It's,
Right,
it's that.
So let's talk then about, you keep it simple, you are, certainly trying to reduce the complexity, and like Italian or French cooking, focus on high quality ingredients and maximizing the expression of those things. What is that next step in your IPA design, kind of approach take? You're now thinking about hops, and you're also thinking about fermentation, and both of those things work together to kind of, help produce this end product IPA that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about the choices that you make in that realm.
Yeah, I think, in terms of fermentation, we don't rush it. I know there's some folks that like to keep a schedule. They like things to be on certain days, so they just plan around that. Like we're normally doing like 17-day tank turns, so the schedule kind of falls where it falls, and we've got to plan around that sometimes. There was a point where we were like, everything's got to be done in 14 days, 2-week schedules, and it wasn't working for us. The output was not where we wanted it to be. So and you hear that. You hear other folks say that too, like, not rushing it, but it's hard to actually not rush it when the taproom needs more beer, or a distributor's calling for more things, or, you see the dollar signs.
And you got started at a really small scale, 3.5 barrel brew house.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you got to make a whole bunch of beer to serve a tap room out of a 3.5 barrel brew house. And so, letting stuff sit in tanks means, having fewer beers to serve to people. And those become real issues for you.
Yeah, it makes scheduling harder too. Like it was nice when we had a schedule where it was like, well, every Tuesday's this, every Wednesday's this, every Thursday's this. But now it's kind of just, it makes it a little harder, but it's worth it. With hops, I think, so we don't go over the top with, even bitterness. It's a restrained bitterness, small charge in the kettle right at the start, and some stuff in the whirl, even dry hops, nothing too crazy. I mean, that's one of those things where I've talked to other folks and they're like, we're putting this many pounds per barrel. We're putting 9 pounds per barrel as dry hop. And I'm like, we've never done more than 3.5 pounds per barrel. But it's funny because you talk to someone from 10 years ago and they're like 3.5 pounds per barrel. That's insane. So I guess it's all perspective. But I think it's just, keeping everything in check.
Is there some, are there technical practices or, anything else that you're doing to help kind of maintain that clarity of expression, for those hops and the way that fermentation works with them? Because, there is just such a nice character to the, the beers that you brew.
No, it's true. There is. The yeast strain is very specific and contributes a lot there. I think, with dry hopping, we don't go too crazy. We recirc the tanks, which gets a little bit harder with scale. We've learned that with the larger tanks, but nothing too crazy, even when we have the haze from our beers, it's a byproduct of process, not the goal, right? We weren't setting out to make the haziest or, some of the things that I hear people doing to make it more hazy with, rushing it and all that, all these things, like none of that is what we're looking to achieve with what we're doing.
And I like that idea of building a beer that people can keep coming back to over and over again, that doesn't have to be the thing that, provides the most intense experience to them, but becomes something that they feel comfortable with. It's nice that, brewers are building hazy, softer, lower bitterness, kinds of beers that people can be attracted to like that. But I know there's something here and I keep trying to find it. There's also, there is that kind of, smooth character and building that balance. Now, talk to me a little bit about, making those hops choices, for those beers, and then how you all build them and how you evaluate that kind of quality of ingredient.
Yeah. So we used to have a rule where we didn't do more than 3 hops in a beer. That kind of was one of those old things, just because that was like, oh, that's a constraint that we can do to keep it simple. But then we realized it wasn't actually doing anything for us. But with General Braddock's, it's, we just say it's a blend. We don't actually put out what we put into it, but it's, it's got some old school hops and some new school hops in it. And I think that's where we look at it of like, we wanted that beer to be, built, like I said earlier, building a bridge between that old and new school thing. Is like, there's things that someone who drank craft beer 5 to 10 years ago still connect with. And there's things that the new craft beer drinker are excited by, and it kind of caters to both in that sense.
Now we're getting somewhere, Matt, and now I'm feeling it. And but I also and I love that approach, and you can taste that approach. And I've written about other brewers that are pulling in some of those kinds of things, making these softer, less bitter, hazier IPAs, and using things like German noble hops or English Goldings or or now of course things like Centennial or some of these classic C hops from the Pacific Northwest that in certain combinations can make for really nice, but they also just, you're right, I think they remind you of these familiar hop flavors and they feel comfortable, for you. Are there some classic C hops, or classic, American craft beer hops that you find you like the way that they work in hazy IPAs or softer, lower bitterness IPAs?
Yeah, absolutely. General Braddock's actually started out as a very heavily Centennial forward beer. We don't use Centennial in General Braddock's anymore. I will say that.
Okay.
But that's, I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
Bell's Two Hearted is
For sure.
a shining example of that hop. I mean, even stuff like Chinook and all of that, like
Right.
Cascade. I mean, I think we're learning new ways to use those same flavors in a more, less just for that bitter charge and more for flavor. And I think it's almost, I'm a huge appreciator of music, but I'm not a musician whatsoever. But it's like that faint melody that you like chase. It's like that. There's that faint note of something where you're like, what is it that that I'm reaching for? And it's right there. It's like right on the tip of your tongue. You don't know why you like it, but it's there. Like that's kind of, I think, something we keep in mind.
If you're thinking about it in a broad term, how, if you're pulling in something classic in a blend like that to try to kind of, build this connection, generally how much of, your overall hops bill would something like that play?
That's a good question. With General Braddock's, I know it's like 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
It's not overly,
it's hinting at things,
yeah,
but
it's not overly.
It's not driving a main narrative.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. It's some other brands will get up into like the 30% range, but nothing where it's like the dominant one, unless we intentionally choose to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
are there, and I know you want to keep some proprietary information around General Braddock, so we'll let you off the hook on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But are there some blends of, kind of classic and new school hops that you all find yourselves particularly drawn to, especially in some of your more experimental, maybe one-off beers?
Yeah. There's one beer we do that I really like that's got Simcoe and Mosaic. Is Simcoe old enough to be a classic hop now? It's like that's actually like that's the turning point hop, I think, is Simcoe. But
it fell out of favor for long enough, I think, maybe now to qualify in that way. Sure.
Yeah, you can't sleep on that. But I would say it's Simcoe, Chinook, and Mosaic hop beer that we do that I really, really enjoy. Trying to think of other ones off the top of my head. I mean, you could probably pair anything with Citra these days and the customer will like it, but I'm trying to think of like what I would actually enjoy. That's a really good question.
Talk to me about some of your wilder, hop experiments and, even beers that may not have worked. I'm curious about this. Just, you, for a long time, again, you're in a different phase with the brewery now and producing more beer, but, for a long time you were doing small batches, and a lot of the beers you sent to our reviewers, were in rubber cork stopped, 750 growlers, just because that was the scale of the brewery. And so you all were doing, you all have played in that kind of realm. Although, interestingly enough, you also do seem to kind of come back to a certain smaller number of cores, on a regular kind of ongoing basis. But, talk to me about some of those crazier experiments and, and what you've learned from them.
Yeah, experiments in what sense? Because like there are some beers that I thought were phenomenal that I still wish we made and no one wanted to drink them. Right? Like
Like what?
We have a beer that's like with single hop IPA pale ale with Hallertau Blanc, and I love that hop. I mean, I think it so beautiful. You get this like almost like white grape, white gummy fruit, but very subtle. And I mean, I can't even tell you the kind of comments we got about it, of it not being it not being this, it not being that. And it's like, well, focus on what it is instead of what it isn't. But we had kind of a whole another set of IPAs that were named after our core values for a time, and kind of all of those were ones that we were really excited about, but they didn't connect with the modern consumer palate. I mean, we did one that was like, we did a beer that was Amarillo, Chinook, Simcoe, and I loved it. I love it. I mean, it was like, it was a nod to a classic beer that we really enjoyed, you know, our interpretation of it, Celebration from Sierra Nevada. And, you know, obviously different hop profile and all that, but it was like kind of a nod, and it didn't sell well. You know, it's just one of those things, you know, what do you do?
For a couple of young guns that came up with a brewery plan in their before they turned to 21, you guys sure do love classics. Mm-hmm. You sure do have this kind of I won't call it conservative, but very much of a rooted kind of approach to taking this craft beer where craft beer has been, and also thinking about that leading edge of folks that are pushing it, and finding that kind of middle ground place. It's it's less common to find younger brewers with that kind of old soul approach to brewing. Where'd that come from?
I think we rode the wave really fast. I always talk about there's this curve that everyone goes through, and it's, you start just drinking whatever, and then you go through and you want to try everything and all that, and then you come back down in the end where you're like, a simple lager will do. I think we went through that curve very quickly, by being thrown into it right away, but also it honestly came from asking a lot of advice from industry vets and talking with them, and kind of hearing the stories of some of these beers, like learning the histories of some of these beers. I mean, it's really easy to get lost in the moment and the fads of the things that are happening right now. But remember, like, beer is and has been around for a very long time. And there's a reason why the classics are the classics. And I think that they have stood the test of time.
That's also an interesting approach, because today there are, certainly that building the beer as a brand approach is a little different. That's, for the long history of beer, that's been the way, or at least in the post-war, history of beer in the United States. Like, that has been the thing. Like, you had major brewery, but people didn't necessarily know the brewery. They knew the beer itself and that brand. Mm-hmm. And, this more recent iteration of or the last decade of craft beer has been driven by the brewery as a brand. And, people go, and the individual beers don't matter as much, but the brewery and that connection to the brewery and who they are and what they're making, I'll go try 2 flights of, and taste every beer that they have. But I'm not going to focus on one in particular. For you all, you kind of focus both on the brewery brand, but also on those individual beer brands, especially with General Braddock's trying to, build this individual beer as its own brand along the way. That it's seems like a different strategy, even though it's one of the older strategies.
What's old is new again. Yeah, it's what's old is new again. I mean, that's beer has been sold a very specific way for a really long time, and we're seeing new ways it's being sold. And can we play in both? I think even with the idea of having a flagship and really focusing on General Braddock's is like, I mean, it says it right on the can, a beer you can always come back to. I mean, we wanted something that people were excited to buy a case of, not, hey, I want a taster in the tap room and that's it. Because even when we had, the tap room was open and we had people in there constantly, they would come in for the new beer and have a taster, but they were filling their growler of General Braddock's, or saying like, I'm going to have a taste of this, but I'm going to sit down and have a pint of General Braddock's. And that kind of tipped us off to that too, of like, we want that to be the fridge beer, right? You can go and grab all these new beers, and even from us, we'll have new beers every week, but we still always have General Braddock's. And I think it's been key to our mindset. It's helped us solve a lot of business problems around that. It's helped us solve a lot of brewing, philosophy challenges, of what we're trying to do. And that, like I said, that's our North Star. So that helps inform a lot of everything else we do. And it brings clarity. Sure.
Let's talk about some other beer styles that you all brew, because, certainly IPA is a thing for you all, and it's a big thing for you, but it's not the only thing you do. Before we do that, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, when it comes to brewing, nobody has your back like Clarion, because their food-grade lubricants are formulated to help make your brewing system 100% food safe. That means when you switch to Clarion, you can put the costly potential of contamination and recall out of your mind. All you need to worry about is brewing great beer, and since you already do that, well, it's more like focusing on business as usual. Go to clarionlubricants.com to learn more. So now let's talk about barrel-aged beers. You all have a multi-pronged approach to that, both on the quote-unquote clean side and that kind of mixed fermentation side, with barrel-aged beers. Talk to me a little bit about what the program looks like and, why you've jumped into kind of certain areas in that field of brewing.
Yeah, our barrel program, so since our first anniversary, we've done a barrel-aged release on our anniversary. It's now coming up on 7 years. So we're actually pulling barrels tomorrow to celebrate our 7th anniversary. We're doing a stout barley wine blend for this one. But we've got we've
stout barley wine blends are so hot right now. Thank you, Side Project in Anchorage, and yeah.
Honestly, that's what we had in barrel. This is the first time we've actually been able to pick barrels out of our collection, which is fantastic because now that we have the bigger brewery running, we've been able to do a lot more. They were so hard to brew on the small side. It was a nightmare every brew. A 3.5 barrel system, the mash tun was not set up for it. It was like, there was one day, we had gloves on and we're just like digging through it. It was a mess. With the bigger side, because it's oversized, we're able to do a lot more with it. But yeah, this year is we brewed a barley wine for next year so that we could do a two-year aged barley wine for the anniversary. I probably shouldn't have said that. But that's what we did.
It's okay. There are no hype-seeking beer traders that listen to this podcast. Yeah. Everybody's generally a brewer.
That's perfect. And so, yeah, we've got that going. But even with those, we've always tried to kind of not do anything too over the top with that. We do an annual release with Double Mex, and that's coffee, vanilla, cinnamon. Again, we actually had a customer come in and say, can't you guys just be that for me? I just want the really big, super syrupy, like pastry stouts from you guys. I know you don't do it. I know it's not your profile, but just be that for me so I don't have to trade for them. And I was like, you've identified that that's not us. You understand the difference of what we're trying to do with our program, and you're still asking for it, which is kind of funny. But with kind of the dark beers and stuff, our anniversary release and Double Mex, I think we've got a couple more ideas in the works on what we kind of want to do to flesh out that program. Now, like I said, that we can do it on the bigger side. And then we've got the mixed culture side, which we started pretty early on. I think we've got some of the smallest fooders that Foeder Crafters built. We've got 2 little 7-barrel fooders. But with that I
don't know. I think Jeff Hardesty at Narrow Gauge also might give you a run for your money.
Like he's got some tiny ones.
He's got some of the tiniest Foeder Crafter fooders that I've ever seen, and they had to like fit within like a 36-inch door frame or something to get down in the basement. It's crazy, but yeah.
So but
that's cute.
Yeah, but for us, I think people didn't realize how small we were. Between 2014 and this last year when we got the new facility up and running, and we still said we wanted to do it, and it was really difficult to pull off. And it was risky, so we said we'll go smaller, and honestly, that market kind of, everyone was getting super into it, and I don't know how developed it's going to continue to be. So I'm almost glad that we have this like smaller program to play within. But for that, those are the beers I really love. It's, again, even the beers in our portfolio that we make reflect that same idea of like balance, restraint. We like to say that table beer, which is kind of the flagship of that program, is tart. It's not sour. It's like lightly tart. And again, same thing. We keep a super simple base. It's basically like 66% base malt, The rest mixed oats and wheat. We ferment it clean. We ferment all those beers clean first. And
Okay.
Yeah. So ferment.
What do you ferment clean? What kind of yeast do you use for the clean fermentation?
Saison strain, just you know, your favorite one, whichever one, you know.
Right.
We then pitch it into foeders, and I think what we did early on, which was I think a lot of folks did early on, was they were taking the dregs from all their other favorite breweries that were making these beers at the time and kind of just, you know, threw them in there. We also add a little bit more Brett each time we move beer into the foeders. And it roughly anywhere between 6 and 12 months in the foeder. I mean, it's timing. It's kind of just patience there. And then it takes another 6 to 12 months in the bottle. So everything's bottle conditioned as well. And, you know, if we're doing fruit for any of those, so we basically have one beer in our kind of mixed culture series, which is the base for a lot of the fruited beers as well. And with fruit, it's, you know, we pull it from the foeders, put it in another tank with fruit, and that's another 2 to 4 months in there, and then again in the bottle. So these things, it's like it takes so long, and we have a lull right now of any of these beers because if you rewind the clock 6 to 12 months ago, that was when we were building the new brew house and the new brewery. So we haven't been able to put as much, we weren't able to put as much energy into it then. So, you know, we don't have a lot of stuff coming out right now, but we've got some stuff in the works there. And I think the entire motto of that program is, you know, slow is fast. And again, keeping it simple. You know, table beer it's light, it's bright, it's got this complex tartness. It's, you know, it's not sour, it's refreshing. It's every beer festival we go to, I bring a couple bottles and keep them under the table because like people will come up to us and be like, "Do you have table beer?" Because we brought it to a number of festivals and you know, brewers especially loved it.
Sure.
And it's got that like really complex tartness. It's not, you know, some sours you can kind of tell they're kind of one note songs, and that's just, you know, the time and whatever dregs are living in our foeders now. Actually, next week there is a class. So I was in the Mellon College of Science at Carnegie Mellon, and I was in the math department, but, you know, knew some folks in the chemistry department, and there is a class that is presenting next week. They came and took samples from the foeders and basically, you know, studied it all semester long. So we'll see what the findings are of what's living in there. But, you know, it's, even with that, it's slow is fast, balance, restraint.
I'm interested in this, you know, pitching more Brett with each new batch. That's interesting because, you know, typically people would assume, I mean, Brett, of all of the bacteria and yeast and wild yeast that's in there, is probably going to, you know, be some of the most aggressive and wouldn't need that kind of help. You know, you know, but at the same time, if you're putting fully fermented beer in there, you're also creating a more stressful environment for any of that stuff to, you know, to exist in, you know, which certainly tilts it in certain directions. You know, what do you find that adding that Brett with each batch does that wouldn't happen if you didn't add it?
Well, we haven't done it without it, so I don't know the difference. It's just one of those things that we did the first time and we kept doing because it worked, and we liked where it went, and we liked where it went, and we haven't ever done it without it. So maybe one of these times we will try. But
well, I mean, conceptually, as I'm thinking about it, I mean, it seems to make, like, if you want that more, you know, kind of, you know, punchy white pepper, you know, bready, linen-y kind of, you know, element to it, and, you know, dry and not as acidic, then, you know, favor it towards that Brett and push it that kind of way. Are there specific Brett strains that you guys, you know, are really attracted to that produce the kind of, you know, flavor that you like out of them?
It was Animala, Brett Animala.
Animala.
Yeah, it's a mix of Brett C and Brett Animala.
Interesting.
I don't know enough. This is the other thing. I don't know about, and that's the entire Wild program has been this for all of us too. We're like, we don't know, like, we're not the guys in Milk the Funk, like getting super technical into all this, trying to discover everything. We're just like, it works.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's risky or if that's a bad thing, but like,
well, on the plus side, if things ever turn for the worse and you can't replicate them, it's a very small portion of the overall beer that you make. And so,
yeah.
So the net impact isn't going to be outrageously huge. And do you with those kinds of beers, there that is, the general creative process is to, come up with a broad parameters and let the beer become what it becomes. But, there's also that flavor approach that you take of wanting to kind of, have this taste the way that you want it to taste. How do you guys hedge those two pieces, against each other and create beer that, that tastes the way that you want it to, despite you using a process that's very hard to control?
Yeah, I mean that's that's basically why we said we can't have table beer be, a flagship the way that General Braddock's is, because that is so hard to replicate. But I think what we've looked at is this is going to be a living thing. This is going to evolve, putting a batch number on it and just starting where we start. And if it completely derails, then we'll have to cut that. But like trying to keep it roughly in, it's almost like, you can see someone's parents in their eyes kind of thing. Like each batch is still like close to, it hasn't derived so far from the kind of the source. Yeah. So, and that, I think that's where the timing comes into it. I mean, that's, tasting the fooders once a month, checking in with them, kind of just seeing where they're going. And then, we've kind of seen what happened. I mean, with bottle conditioning, I mean, it's roughly 6 to 12 months it takes, and we'll taste them. We'll wait like 3 months to even taste the first one just to see. I mean, we'll get that like THP character, that like Cheerios thing, and it completely disappears after 6 months, a little bit longer sometimes. I'm really sensitive to it, so like I taste it right away. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's a timing thing with that. And not getting too stressed about it. I mean, you kind of that's the beauty of those beers.
And then I think the other key there is that word, taste, that you all are very active in making sure that, the beers that you release taste the way that you want them to taste, not releasing things that aren't ready to be released or don't taste the way that you want them to taste. Mm-hmm. That kind of restraint is hard, especially, when you were a smaller brewery and, you made things, you need to sell things. How does that process enter into it? And how often do you find yourself like tasting something like that doesn't taste the way we want it? How do we move or fix or, or push this in the direction we want it to be in? Yeah,
I mean, through our entire portfolio, that's been the case. We won't blend a barrel if it's not good. We won't, we'll dump a batch if it's not good. I mean, you just have, like, those are like, you just have to do them kind of things. But we haven't run into that a ton. I mean, with scaling up, the first batch of GB wasn't there. We dumped that one. And since then, though, it was like, that was like the just the adjustment shot. Yeah. And then from there, it's been, going really smooth.
That's incredibly typical. I mean,
everyone
getting it in one batch is actually pretty fantastic. Usually it can take at least 2 or 3 to get up to that point. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little more about barrel aged clean beers. You mentioned Double Mex, which is this kind of Mexican hot chocolate approach to barrel aged stout. Talk to me about some of the other clean beers that you make, and then what that kind of process of building flavors looks like in those beers.
Yeah. Again, from the recipe development side, we're not trying to do anything too crazy. I mean, there are really great recipes for old ale or, really great recipes for barley wine that you can look at and, see parallels between, I mean, obviously applying everything to the knowledge that we have from just, batch to batch that we've learned, starting with, again, not going too crazy complex with these things. And with barrel selection, be nice to your barrel dealer, get the good stuff, get the good stuff. I mean, and then, I've heard a lot of noise and kind of other people, lore around what you should be doing with this. And, it's temperature controlling things and doing all this stuff, and that we just fill the barrels and let them sit and give them time. I think that's the thing is, don't try to fiddle with things too much. You just let them sit and let them go. And that's been the approach, and it's worked for us so far. So,
gravity, where do you end up on that? I mean, certainly when you're barrel aging beers that are of lower gravities, you can end up with, again, there's that common, kind of approach of making sure that you're putting higher gravity, higher alcohol beers into kind of barrels in order to make sure that they don't spoil. But if I recall, I think you all, at least some of the ones that we've reviewed, have barrel-aged beers on that lower end of the ABV spectrum, which, might be a little bit risky.
Yeah, I mean, so on the smaller side, we basically maxed out at 10% what we could get out of it. Yeah, like
that wasn't philosophically driven. That was purely production constraint.
That was basically where we were at. So I think double mix is normally somewhere around 9.9%. This year it'll probably be a little bit bigger because we're on the bigger side. I mean, I think with all the things that we've done on the bigger side so far, we've aimed for, to have it be around 12 to 13%. Nothing too big. I mean, we're talking about barrel-aged beers now, but I even think to like our double IPAs, most of them are like 8.5% at most. Like we don't really do beers that, these IPAs that are 9, 10, 11%. Similar with some of these barrel-aged beers. I mean, 10, 11. I mean, barley wine in what's the classic one? Fuller's. What is Fuller's barley wine called? It's like 7.8%. It's one of those things where it started as a production constraint, but now
you kind of like what you ended up with.
Kind of like what we ended up with, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about business a little bit, because I know you guys are in the midst of this kind of shift that you have installed a new brew house, 22 barrel kind of capacity. You've taken a big leap up from 3.5 barrels to this. You are canning beer. Obviously, everybody's canning beer. Well, packaging or canning beer in some sort of way over this past year. But you've made a pretty big leap into that kind of direction. And it's pushing the brewery into even newer directions and kind of amplifying growth really quickly for you. Talk to me about some of those challenges that you're facing and problems that you're solving these days.
Yeah, so we're now in May and our tap room is still not open.
Yeah.
So we are still doing beer to go.
Is that due to law or is that due to choices?
Choices.
Okay.
We've thought a lot about what kind of the future of retail is going to look like. And, we've put a lot of time and energy into that and are being, it's a bummer because we love having people down here and in the space. And it's great to have folks being able to drink draft and all that. But we've really focused on still having beer to go down here so people can still come to Braddock, but then really building out kind of the other arms of our business right now with distribution and all that, and really, really trying to rethink what our experience is going to be, not just our taproom experience, but the entire, retail experience of Brew Gentlemen. And I've got more questions than answers right now, but I think it's one of those, we will reopen. It's just how and kind of what it's going to look like. And it will look different than what the taproom was originally.
What, in what way are you thinking about that?
I think for a little bit of time, we got away from the core experience of, we became, even with a brewery's hours, we were open super late on weeknights and on weekends. And it was like, that's not what we're trying to do here. Like, let's have people come down here for taste, pick up beers and stuff, and then say, go to a restaurant that has our beer on draft for dinner. Like, it's starting there. And even just thinking of like what, as we continue to welcome people back into Braddock again, what that experience looks like too. That was something we were really intentional about with lines, like with all of our barrel age releases and stuff. We were very conscious of, a lot of people liked forming lines. We tried to avoid it because we're still in a town that's economically depressed. We're still we're still trying to be conscious of our neighbors. Braddock is small. We've got 2,000 people who live in Braddock. And so you do a release and you got a line of 200 people out the door, you're increasing the population by 10%. And the craft beer line stands out in our neighborhood. So I think we're just continuing to be conscious of that and thinking through how do we be a community space as well. And it's, again, like I said, we've got more questions than answers right now, but we're asking ourselves those questions and how that all plays out. And a lot of people might not have to think through these same problems, right? Like depending on where you're located, these might not be the questions on your plate and these might not be the considerations you have to make. But for us, it's something that it is.
It is interesting to see that, breweries are addressing these questions with different kinds of answers. There are at the same time breweries in many states that are opening more tap rooms, opening more places for people to buy beer directly from that brewery, and taking the exact opposite strategy, that you're looking at there. But at the same time, it is interesting to see, like, when I started drinking craft beer, or I should say, when I lived in New York City for from 2001 to 2010, like, you go to a brewery and you didn't hang out there. You got tasters and a growler.
Yep.
They couldn't sell you beer, and so you would taste some beers and hang out for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and try a few things. And then you put your growler order in of what you tried, and then you took the beer home and you drink it wherever you drank it. This kind of modern era of the tap room as a pub is, it's a not necessarily the way that's always been done. Having said that, I like both of those models. I love going to a brew pub and ordering food and ordering, drinking beer that brewer made. And, I do love this tap room kind of experimentation and exploration kind of approach. And, but it's also curious now. And I'm wondering from your perspective, as we look at the kind of shipping and distribution and getting beer all over the country, or at least even shipped within your state kind of approach, where a lot of breweries have moved to over this past year, that has to also change the way that you think about this kind of thing, because now people can relate to your brand in different kinds of ways. And, what does that destination experience look like for the guy who lives across, or the woman who lives on the other side of the state and then wants to come see the place where, the beer that she's ordered, is brewed? Like, how do you, what does that experience look like?
Yeah. One of the things early on we asked ourselves was, how do we translate the taproom experience online? How do we scale the experience that people have had here to people who can't make it down here? And now with purchasing options, like you said, we're in Pennsylvania, so we can ship statewide. There's a few other states that we can ship to that are very close by. If they do become a customer through that first online interaction, then how do they interact with our brand in its physical space, and making sure that, they mirror each other. That's a huge problem to solve right now for any brand. In any industry, is how do you have that online presence reflect kind of what's going on in the physical space day to day?
How has this past year of packaging beer and shipping beer impacted the volumes of the different beers that you make? Have you found that this audience consuming in this kind of way buys beer in different volumes than they may have the prior year?
Not necessarily. I would say that we're seeing similar. You've got people that will just, every week order, 3-4 packs, and you got people that are ordering 2 cases at a time. Like, I haven't seen any patterns like that emerge too crazily. But it's one thing that we thought with, statewide shipping is, more people will want the classic styles because, it's the broader audience. It's like, no, it's the people that are paying to ship beer are the ones that just fill up their entire box full of hops. So, great. We've got a lot of that stuff to offer. So, nothing, no other like crazy trends have emerged from that, other than the fact that, that's now an option for people, and something that we're excited about. It's basically, this idea of like, it's infinite shelf space, right? If you don't have to fight for distribution points, and because you can ship directly to the customer, that's a new win for small brewers.
Yeah, for sure. And something that we're all going to have to continue to engage in deeper ways as these laws continue to evolve and, allow for greater freedom and alcohol sales. Like, thank goodness we've been getting rid of, through this past year, some of the more onerous restrictions on alcohol sales in a lot of states. Of course, it's not universal, but we may get to some sort of fluid free market, and it's going to be amazing to see, just how that looks down the road. Matt, the way we generally end the podcast is with, a bigger picture question, zooming out. And for you and Brew Gentlemen, what does success look like? When will you know that you've achieved it, and how do you define it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's something that we've thought a lot about, and our long-term plans with the new facility. But for us, I think first and foremost, we really want General Braddock's to be Pittsburgh's IPA. We want that to be the beer that the city that we're in is proud of, that they're proud to share, that it's something that is regionally people are excited about. And I think that ensuring that the beer that we're making continues to follow how we're describing it, so that what it says is really what you get, that there's that it's a form of integrity, right? When we say a soft and balanced beer and you drink it and you're like, oh yeah, that is soft, that I totally get what they mean by that. There's a lot of, especially over the last few years, we've seen a lot of ridiculous language in all facets of life, whether it's beer marketing or, on television or in other types of media, these over promises, these ridiculous language, things that like beer can't even, some of these, beer descriptions, I'm like, how does a beer even live up to that? We want to make sure that, our actions and our beers are following our words and how we talk about it. I think that's, something that we're really excited about and continuing to want to deliver, to continue to have soft and balanced beers, to continue to have, things like General Braddock's be something that you can come back to and have that continue to be reflected. And that would be a huge amount of success for us, I think, is that form of integrity.
How much change is required over time to maintain that? Consumers change and their palates change. Mm-hmm. And also in order to achieve that, it's not necessarily one goal, but it's a constant evaluating of where you are, and how your customers respond to it against that kind of metric. How do you do that?
That's the work. That's the constant challenge, right? That's showing up every day. That's the consistency. I think that's the nice thing with, even just our definition of balance is something that we can always strive for, right? And, we're constantly going to be readjusting to that. So you just get a little bit better at solving the challenges as they get harder, but that's the work.
And that work is never done.
Nope.
G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Set your compass by raw North Star Pills. Benefit from the scale of Old Orchard. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com today. SS Brewtech is advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality, and gain peace of mind with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. If you're a pro brewer, try our All Access Pro subscriptions to combine the magazine's exclusive online content and more. Matt, if people want to learn more about Brew Gentlemen, or even if they live in a state that you might ship to, where do they find you?
brewgentlemen.com. That's MEN, and at Brew Gentlemen /Brew Gentlemen on everything else.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for talking with me on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure. Just as drinking your beer is always a pleasure too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Yeah. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.